If you've ever been waiting for the right moment to pick up Star Wars Jedi Survivor, that moment might actually be right now. The game is currently at its lowest historical price ever, just $6.99 for the next 3 days. But there is a big question for Steam Deck owners: can the deck actually run it well? Because when this game launched originally, it was known for serious performance issues even on high-end PCs. So today we're putting it to the test. I'm gonna show you raw performance on Steam Deck, battery life results, the best settings to use, and one community mod that dramatically improves the performance. By the end of this video, you know exactly whether Jedi Survivor is worth installing on your Steam Deck. Let's jump in. Before we get into the performance, a quick overview. Star Wars Jedi Survivor is the sequel to the Jedi Fallen Order game, and it continues the story of Cal Kestis, one of the last surviving Jedi after Order 66. The game is a third-person action-adventure focused on exploration, platforming, puzzle solving, and lightsaber combat. The combat actually feels similar to the first game, but it is expanded with multiple lightsaber stances, more force abilities, larger environments to explore, and bigger, more cinematic boss fights. The worlds are also significantly larger this time around, which is great for immersion, but it's also one of the reasons why the game is very demanding on hardware. Before even launching the game, there are a few things Steam Deck users should know. First, the install size. This game takes up around 130 gigabytes of storage, so if you're planning to install it on your Steam Deck, make sure you have enough space available. This alone might require using a large SD card or upgrading your internal SSD if you have the lowest LCD Steam Deck storage. It is a pretty big install size. Second, unfortunately, the game requires the EA launcher. The good news is you only really see it during the initial setup process, and once that's done, mostly stays in the background and doesn't interfere with gameplay. The bad news is that you're not able to play this game offline. When you try to launch it offline, the launcher will say, hey, you can go offline, you can play this game, but first you need to sign in and you need to take off the keep me signed in. So you can do that if you go to the desktop, and I did that, and I tried launching it maybe 10 times, and every time it would just freeze. It wouldn't launch in offline mode and with no internet, so that's a bummer. And third, there are a couple of minor UI issues on Steam Deck. In some menus, the buttons on the right and left side of the screen can get slightly cut off. It's not game breaking, you can still mostly read what it says, but it's definitely noticeable. Thankfully, gameplay itself works fine, but it is a small issue. Alright, let's talk about actual performance on the Steam Deck. For the baseline test, I used lowest graphical settings, FSR2 set to balanced, and with those settings, performance generally sits between 30 and 40 FPS. Most of the time you'll see numbers in the low to mid 30s, with occasional jumps closer to 40 in lighter areas. However, there are some stutters, especially when entering new areas, so during heavier scenes, and the game has actually dropped to 8 FPS at some point. So some of the cinematics in-game, they are rendered in-game engine, and they perform absolutely horrendous. There is this cinematic here with a fight with this Inquisitor, which dropped to 8 FPS. The whole cinematic was around 14 FPS most of the time. It was really not great. This is mostly due to the game's CPU load and asset streaming, and even on desktop PCs, Jedi Survivor has always been known for its inconsistent frame pacing, so while it's technically playable on the Steam Deck like that, the experience at the default settings feels very rough around the edges. You can play it, I did not experience any crashes, but it's just not great. It will not hold 30 FPS in some of the heavier scenes. In actual gameplay, most of the time things feel pretty fine while exploring. Movement and traversal are responsive enough, and the smaller Steam Deck screen helps hide some of the lower graphical settings, but the combat can expose some of these performance dips, and when multiple enemies appear or when using force abilities, the frame rate can dip below 30 FPS. It's not constant, but it's definitely noticeable once that happens. So if you're playing the game without any optimization, you can expect 30 FPS style experience with occasional stutters, and in fact, limiting the FPS to 30 will be your best option. Battery life like that, using the default setup, is around 2 hours and 30 minutes. For a large AAA title like this, that's actually pretty reasonable. The deck is working hard here, so anything around the 2 to 3 hour range is fairly typical. And fan noise, you can expect that to be a little bit high, not on the max, but you can definitely hear it. Now, I also tried lossless scaling to see if we could smooth out the experience. Unfortunately, the results weren't really great at first because the base frame rate often drops below 30 FPS. Lossless scaling introduces significant input latency, and that means lightsaber combat starts to feel a bit sluggish, and not only the combat, but even traversing around. It's becoming a little floaty. Parries become harder to hit, and overall responsiveness takes a hit. So without any additional tweaks, lossless scaling alone isn't going to be a great solution here. But this is where things get interesting. After playing for a couple of hours, I actually searched online and found a mod. On Nexus Mods, there is a community optimization mod called May the Performance Be With You, and it has several tiers. One of them is specifically made for the Steam Deck, and this mod actually makes a very noticeable difference. Once installed, the game becomes much more stable on the Steam Deck. So instead of hovering around 30 FPS, performance can reach around 40 to 45 FPS in many of the areas in game, which is a major improvement. This smoother baseline frame rate opens the door for actually useful lossless scaling, because at 45 FPS you can get some decent results. We can upscale to around 90 FPS with 2 times frame generation. It will drop sometimes to 75 FPS, but it's still a very good experience. Even without lossless scaling, the experience is much better with this mod. And obviously you will take some visual hits. The most I notice is that some of the assets that are close to you just pop up on the screen, like some of these bushes will just pop up a few meters away. So if that takes out the immersion from the game, that's what we gotta do, I guess. With the mod installed and with lossless scaling enabled, the game can upscale from roughly 45 FPS to about 80-90 FPS. It works much better than expected. Motion appears smoother, frame pacing improves, the game simply feels better to play. Of course, with lossless scaling, there's always going to be the artifacting issues, but as you can see here on the menu in the bottom left corner, we can see that health line jumping up and down. You're going to see that a lot with lossless scaling. However, there's virtually no input lag, and I think the biggest improvement with it is in combat. The lightsaber feels way more fluid, camera movement is smoother, and exploration feels less choppy overall. With lossless scaling, you're actually looking also at better battery life. We jumped to about 3 hours and 15 minutes, which is fantastic. Even if you decide not to use lossless scaling, the mod alone still provides noticeable performance boost, so it's absolutely worth installing. And the way to install it, I'll have a link to Nexus Mods in the description below. You basically have to download the file and you have to place it in the games folder. There's instructions on the website. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them in the comments. Now, visually, you're still running the game at low settings, even on lower settings than what the menu allows, but on the Steam Deck smaller screen, it honestly still looks good, and on the OLED, it looks very good. Lighting effects, environments, and character models still retain a lot of the detail, and the cinematic presentation, which Respawn has done very well, still shines through. So my final verdict, I think it's absolutely worth playing on the Steam Deck. If you run it completely stock, the experience is playable but rough, but once you install the performance mode and tweak a few settings, things improve dramatically. You can reach around 45 FPS, smooth things out with scaling, and even get over 3 hours of battery life. Considering the game is currently only $6.99 US, I think that's a fantastic deal. Just keep in mind the 130GB install size, the EA launcher requirement, and the fact that it benefits heavily from a mod, and you kind of need that mod to have a better experience. But if you're willing to do a little bit of tinkering, a little bit of setup, I think the result is it. And if you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like, subscribe to the channel for more Steam, Steam Deck, Steam Machine, and overall Steam platform videos, benchmarks, news. Join the Steam group and follow the Steam Flow curator page. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.